Welcome back to the class. In today's class, we are discussing Du Bois and the question of race. Now, you in the previous class, I briefly mentioned the reason why I decided to include Du Bois and Perkins Gilman in our discussion on gender and race, because these questions were not integral to the concerns of sociologists of that particular time. And when we critically looked at quite a lot of scholars, we argued that they either overlooked or they did not give sufficient, uh, or they did not sufficiently and rigorously analyze the question of gender and race in their arguments. So it is important that we get at least some familiarity with some of the scholars of the same time period, late 19th and early 20th century scholars, who what they have to say about these two very important themes. So in the previous class, we discussed about the early feminist Perkins Gilman, and in today's class, let us see what was the arguments of Du Bois and his contribution to the problematization of race. So he was an African American sociologist, W. E. B. Du Bois, 1868, and he passed away in 1963. Issues of race and cultural identity were his major, focus areas. He also addresses the relationship between economic and cultural power, a very important theme, especially quite a lot of very Marxian theme, which tries to make a connection between the influence of economic power and cultural power, the relation between economic and cultural relationship. And Du Bois formulated the idea of a black public sphere and its relationship to the African American culture. And this public sphere as a major theoretical argument comes much later, basically by Habermas. But he was able to talk about the relevance for a American black public sphere and its role in the genesis of an African American culture. Two very important books. One is this, The Philadelphia Negro and The Souls of Black Folk. These two books are really are very very famous and very popular, which really tells us what are the central themes of Du Bois. And the first ethnographic and statistical account of the black community in the US. Du Bois reconstructs modernity from the slave's point of view, drawing on images and ideas that are often outside the purview of theorists such as Marx, Durkheim, and Weber. So this is exactly what we have been saying. While these scholars and a host of others whom we discussed so far, they were clearly living at the peak of colonialism. They were living at the peak of debates about slavery and the need to do away with slavery, but they did not really deem it worthwhile to explain or to explore social phenomena from the point of view of a slave. Or for them, the racial difference was not the major central concern. And the very fact that all these people, Marx, Durkheim, Weber, and whomever we discussed so far, they were the white males. Okay, there's hardly any female sociologists, classical sociologists of our time, and they were all European males, and that played a very important role in shaping their areas of interest and shaping their blind spots. So race and gender were important blind spots for these people. He was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University. You know how prestigious Harvard University is. But he faced racism in his entire life, never teaching in a white majority university. Du Bois eventually became disillusioned with the US and migrated to Ghana near the end of his life. Now, this is the tragedy of the whole story. A person who comes from such a difficult background, such a marginalized community, and he becomes the first PhD holder from the African American group from the prestigious Harvard University, but failed to secure a permanent job in the white majority university. And nobody would have told him directly that because that you are a black, we are not appointing him. Nobody would say that, rather they would enforce it. They would ensure that he is not selected. That's how power operates. That's how the dominance operates. That's how the hegemony operates. So he lived in an era where racial segregation and discrimination were legally sanctioned. And we know the stories of apartheid. We know that how in public transport seats were allotted for whites and blacks, how voting rights were not given to the blacks, how certain restaurants are earmarked only for the whites. So once there is a legal legitimacy for that, when there is a formal form of racism exists, it's very difficult for people from that particular community to thrive. So social Darwinism, and again a kind of an intellectual context, a kind of a role of the science in legitimizing this kind of a perception, was a misinterpretation of Darwin. And scholars like our Herbert Spencer really have contributed to that when he used this term struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. He was importing, he was translating the Darwinian idea into that of a society, an extremely problematic one. So social Darwinism, that is the survival of the fittest, justified the privileges of white and the poor treatment of African American and other minorities. They would simply argue that if you have enough wherewithal, if you have enough resources within you, you will survive. Otherwise, you will perish. We are able to, the whites are able to survive. We are able to dominate you because we are mentally equipped. We are culturally more progressive. We are physically stronger. We are educationally forward. We are more intelligent than you. So and that is the law of the nature. We are there to survive, and if you lose out, you lose out. And much US social science was explicitly racist, drawing on dubious biology to scientifically demonstrate the alleged superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. And we also know that sciences like physical anthropology that scientifically categorized people into different races by measuring their body parts, by talking about a nasal index, by talking about cephalic index, by talking about the texture or the structure of the lip, of the breast, of the hair. They categorized people into different groups with that implicit assumption that the Anglo-Saxon race or the Caucasoid, they are the most superior race. So Du Bois was influenced by Marx, Hegel, and the American pragmatist tradition. Like Marx, he sees that ownership of wealth often translates into social power. So he was a Marxist to a large extent because he argued that the white dominance is built up on the monopoly over their of their ownership of the wealth. And if you look at the America then, and if you look at the America now as well, you see this kind of a very disproportionate distribution of wealth among the whites and the blacks. And the blacks are predominantly represented in the poorer section. And that kind of a segregation, even the places where they live, are very clearly demarcated. And that was the situation even then. So in the Philadelphia Negro and in Souls of Black Folks, Du Bois often views immorality manifested in alcoholism, prostitution and crime among a large section of African American population as contributing to their problems and poverty. He traces this moral deficit to the legacy of slavery and racism. And you know the kind of the white discourse which are reflected in popular novels and movies and other thing as this black ghetto as the place of anarchy, place of sexual anarchy, place of drugs, place of poverty, crime, where no educated or no cultured white man or woman would venture into. And he argued that all these things, all this moral decadence which are seen in quite a lot of alcoholism, prostitution, that need to be seen in the larger background of slavery and racism. Because these people who are at the lowest sections of the society, they have nothing much to expect. They don't have any easy opportunity to break from the shackles and then lead a more dignified life. So Du Bois argues that the world was becoming divided into master capitalists, primarily white, who control most wealth, the national middle class of many countries, European, Hispanic and Asian, who share bonds of common interest and history, and finally the oppressed workers of all nations, primarily Black, Asian and Hispanic. According to Du Bois, racism is the major hindrance to a fair distribution of wealth. White benefit economically from racism, and the profit of colonialism accruing to West prevents social change. An extremely powerful argument, because we know there are theories in development, including dependency theory and world system theory, which talk about how the colonial countries have been systematically able to able to extract profit through unequal trade from the countries in the periphery and in the semi-periphery, and through transatlantic slave trade. But Du Bois argues that you can't only you can't only speak about that the beneficiaries are the European countries, but you need to look at what kind of people are getting benefited. And he's very clear that this entire enterprise of colonialism and the whole transatlantic slave trade primarily, basically benefited only the white class. It only benefited the white class at the expense of the blacks. The situation of the blacks deteriorated and the situation of the whites improved systematically. In the opening line of The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois writes that whites view him as a problem. This is typical of the stereotyping of blacks as a problem. Rather than the people with problems, blacks are viewed as abstractions rather than individuals. It's a very, very powerful observation. You can even think about in the contemporary Indian scenario, an untouchable, a person from a lower caste, is seen as a problem. Okay, you don't want to look at what kind of a person he is. He could be a nice person, he could be a very intelligent person, he could be an extremely studious person, but in the conventional understanding, you don't really ask this question, what kind of a person is that? The very fact that he belonged to this particular caste is sufficient to brush him aside, or that is sufficient to assume that that person is good for nothing, or to assume that that person cannot come up in life, or he will not be able to do well in education, or he should not come and then have any kind of relationship with him. So in that sense, it becomes almost impossible for any lower caste person, or in the case of Du Bois, any black person to break free from that perception and to prove himself, how much ever different he is. Here, a person is evaluated not on the basis of his personal qualities. A person is evaluated on the basis of something which he can't do anything about it. Okay, it's a stereotypical impression. It's a kind of a stereotyping a whole population. You don't really go into how different people are. So that is a very, very terrible lesson, terrible experience, and only people who really suffer that will realize that. So Du Bois also develops the idea of a double consciousness and the metaphor of the veil. The black and the white worlds are divided by a veil that requires role playing on the part of the blacks rather than a real interaction. The blacks are always supposed to keep in the back. The blacks are always supposed to hide behind a veil, because legally it is sanctioned and popularly, culturally as well. An African American double consciousness, that of being black and American, is often conflicted, and blacks must suppress their rage at their oppression in order to assuage white anxiety. Okay, so the moment you question the white supremacy, you will be seen as questioning the integrity of America. Okay, so there is a kind of a double consciousness. You are supposed to work together with the white psyche in order to protect the American pride, but at the same time, in your everyday life, you are facing the discrimination on your personal and your social life. But the moment you talk about that, you will be easily branded as somebody who is sabotaging the idea of a American greatness, and that is a kind of a trap that the blacks are brought in. And you know the kind of very recent upheaval that have swept across America, the Black Lives Matter argument, and even after this many years, this many decades, America is being able to resolve the issue of black issue or issues of racism. So for Du Bois, The density of African Americans is not to be absorbed by the white majority. Sorry, the destiny of African American is not to be absorbed by the white majority, but to have their particular contributions recognized and cultivated. Black colleges, newspaper, and other organs of education are necessary for such a culture. So he was very, very clear that the blacks are being able to make their own progress. They have their own culture, they have their own arguments, and they must be able to empowered. And it's not that they have given some kind of peanuts, they have given some kind of reservation, they have given some kind of a token forms. But he very strongly argued that the blacks have to take their destiny into their own hands, and they can't be at the mercy of the white. So the power of a dominant culture to repress difference is demonstrated in the taken for granted beliefs of whiteness. And he questions how this whiteness is constructed. Whiteness as equivalent to that of efficiency, whiteness as equivalent to beauty, whiteness as equivalent to naturalness, whiteness as equivalent to say orderliness, whiteness as equivalent to integrity. These are all kind of a cultural constructs that Du Bois very systematically demolishes and deconstructs. And Du Bois' analysis of whiteness has a contemporary resonance as it has become a popular topic in culture studies and critical race perspectives. So they, a host of new academic endeavors, especially from culture studies point of view or media studies point of view, try to understand how this whiteness was equated with all these positive qualities or positive traits, and thereby by implication, black represents all that is negative. Du Bois argues that more insidious form of prevention of democracy is the practice of benevolent guardianship of those ostensibly unable to act for themselves. Du Bois contends that African Americans and women have both been treated as weak-minded subjects by white men who supposedly knew better. But this is simply the old cry of privilege which must be abolished. The argument that, okay, we are talking for them, we are benevolent. They are not able to talk about themselves because they are educated, they are less intelligent, we are here to represent them. And this is an extremely problematic, dangerous trend that Du Bois identifies. And even now these debates are extremely relevant in the contemporary discussions about caste, about feminism, about gender, about race, that who can speak for whom? How can somebody from a privileged position claim to represent the less privileged? How do we understand? How do the less privileged represent themselves? What are their resources? And why it is so paramount? Why it is so important that the less privileged learn to represent themselves with whatever flaws and inadequacies there might be. So some of these very current debates Du Bois is able to raise even during that particular time. And African Americans, while they are subjected to racism, must develop their own sense of dignity and worth. African Americans must be educated to be actional, as Nietzsche might say. Thus, Du Bois argues that the leadership of the African American community must come from blacks themselves. A very, very important point, that they must empower, something similar to what Ambedkar has argued. You must educate, empower, and agitate. You must education and then self-empowerment is the only way through which the lower class or lower caste will be able to come up. No privileged group is going to give away their privileges without struggle. That is the history of mankind. No privileged section, whether it is male or whites or upper caste or feudal lords, nobody is going to simply give away their privileges upon mere request. It's only through sustained effort, sustained movement, sustained agitation that the powerful were forced to devolve some amount of power. It has not happened the other way around. Nothing has happened out of benevolence. Nothing has happened out of a sudden change of heart. That's a history. So Du Bois thought the future of the world will rest ultimately in the hands of the darker nation. He became an advocate of Pan-Africanism and developed a strong critique of the oppression of women. So that is why he focused more in forming a kind of a pan African kind of a friendship alliance, a friendship and alliance, a sense of brotherhood. He believed that the destiny of the world ultimately lies with them. For Du Bois, one of the mightiest revolts of the century is against the devilish decree that no woman is a woman who is not by present standards a beautiful woman. And Du Bois brings in the whole question of gender in his analysis, and then looks at how a notion of beauty is created in a white-centric world. Culture determines identities. It's a type of power that extends even to the conceptions of the body, and such forms of cultural authority must be challenged. The very usual practice to equate whiteness with beauty. And I don't need to explain you that, isn't it? Our heroines are always been fair. We have been using fair and lovely cream all through. Dark woman, a dark heroine is never accepted. A dark woman is never seen, celebrated as a symbol of beauty. Okay, we have seen stories of a whole lot of such kind of stories. So Du Bois criticizes that very vehemently. He says that it's a kind of a culturally constructed notion of beauty. Much of Du Bois' thought can be interpreted as elitist. Why? Because he believed that an elites will be able to transform the society. He believed that a group of elites need to emerge, and these elites will be able to change the society. He tends to believe that a cultural elite must arise to lead people in a rational direction. And this again might look contradictory. A person who speaks for the sake of the subordinated people still want a class of elite from there. Du Bois' sociological account of race, culture, and the individual provides a complex, socially and historically informed understanding of suffering, the relationship between power and knowledge, and the tribulations of a divided self. So, he as a person who was born and brought up as a African American who belongs to this black community, who witnessed first-hand discrimination and subjugation from the whites, who studied social science, means who studied society in a scientific manner. So he was in a far better position to make sense of all these issues. So his focuses on colonialism and the intersections of race and class domination in a more powerful manner than other theorists of his time. So this is what makes Du Bois an extremely important sociologist. Even before many other people began to speak about the relationship between economy and race. He implicitly raises the question of the black diaspora, of the problem of transnational notions of black identity in the context of racism and oppression. Such ideas must develop within and outside of the conventional accounts of modernity, taking racism and imperialism to be the central components of black experience and modernity itself. And this is an extremely important point, a kind of a prophetic terms, prophetic themes, because now if you look into the kind of rise of post-colonial studies or decolonizing attempts, they always want this racism and imperialism and colonialism to be to the fore. So Du Bois, as a black scholar, was really prophetic in his argument that unless you address the question of imperialism and identity, the racial question of identity, the black identity, this entire discourse about modernity would become incomplete. It would only remain incomplete, because any amount of talk about class, any amount of talk about social structures will be insufficient. It will be incomplete without paying adequate attention to these questions. So that is the relevance of Du Bois. Okay, so I hope by now why that we spent two sessions, one discussing on Du Bois, the other one discussing on the scholar on gender. Okay, so these are the themes that are generally neglected by the mainstream sociologists. These are the themes that either they deliberately or unconsciously neglected or avoided. But now, looking back, now we realize that even then, during the times of all the stalwarts, these themes were extremely relevant, and that is why they continue to be relevant even now, informing and infuriating some of the most intense debates of our times. So, okay, so let us stop here, and we'll meet for the next class. Yeah, thank you.